doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship,
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
and no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Fridays from 8, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Very good morning and welcome to The Point on GB News with me, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce this morning.
Tributes, of course, are pouring in for the young victims of the Nottingham attack, two 19-year-olds. The family of Barnaby Webber has issued an extraordinary moving statement saying he was beautiful and brilliant and was thrilled to have made the university cricket team. They say they are bereft beyond belief.
Grace Kumar was an England hockey player. The governing body of the sport has paid tribute. We'll be live in Nottingham for the latest on the investigation.
And the Schofield saga, it's reaching the House of Commons today because the boss of ITV, Dame Kylie McCall, has been summoned by MPs. They're going to quiz her about what she knew about the presenters' affair and whether they neglected their duty of care to a very young employee.
We've also got Emma Webb and Stephen Pound are going to be in the studio with us this morning to go through some big stories of the day. But first of all, here is your news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Bev, thank you and good morning. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. Vigils will be held for the victims of the stabbing and van attacks in Nottingham, which claimed 3 lives and injured 3 others. 19-year-old Barnaby Webber was killed along with Grace Kumar, who's been named locally. His family has said complete devastation isn't enough to describe their pain and loss over his senseless murder. A 31-year-old suspect is still being questioned by police, who were trying to establish a motive. A man in his 50s was also killed. The force believes his van was stolen and used to target other people. This is the scene on Ilkeston Road, where there's still a police presence with a cordon set up around a home. It's one of a number of properties which has been raided and searched in the area. Officers are working with counter-terrorism police as part of their investigation. They've said they're keeping an open mind. ITV's handling of complaints against Philip Schofield is being questioned by MPs. CEO Carolyn McCall is being asked about the broadcaster's approach to safeguarding employees following the TV presenter's departure from This Morning. He quit after admitting he had an affair with a young male colleague, which he described as unwise but not illegal. Dame Carolyn has already written to the Culture Secretary, confirming ITV has now instructed a barrister to carry out an external review. Stronger trade at bars, pubs and shops has helped the economy return to growth. The latest figures show it expanded by 0.2% in April, recovering from a 0.3% fall the previous month. The Office for National Statistics says the positive impact of improved hospital and retail spending was offset by industrial action hitting other sectors. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has welcomed the data but admits more work needs to be done.
Today's figures confirm what the OECD said last week, the IMF said last month. The Bank of England themselves have said that there is underlying resilience in the British economy, and of course that's positive, but we still have a big issue with inflation. That is the number one challenge we face. We have to do everything we can as a government, as a country, to support the Bank of England in their mission to squeeze inflation out of the system, and that is our primary focus.
Thousands of NHS appointments are being affected by a junior doctors' strike in England. Union members walk off the job this morning for 72 hours over an ongoing dispute. The British Medical Association's asking for a full restoration of pay, which it says has seen a 26% cut. They've so far rejected a 5% offer. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com. Now it's back to Andrew and Bev.
Well, we're going to go live to Nottingham to our Home and Security editor, Mark White. Mark, morning to you. We've been digesting how moving the statement is from the family of Barnaby. And, of course, we shouldn't forget the 52-year-old van driver who was stabbed to death as well. We don't have his identity yet. And, of course, there are still people in hospital, one of them who is critically injured as a result of being struck by that van. What's happening there now, Mark?
Yes, good morning. This time yesterday, of course, we were just absorbing the news coming in, these very worrying reports from Nottingham that certainly indicated that people had been stabbed, others run over. But, of course, in the fullness of time, the true reality of the devastating impact of these attacks is becoming known. And the two youngest victims, 19 years old, both of them, just in their first year at university with their whole lives ahead of them. And the family already of one of the victims, Barnaby Webber, have issued a statement just outlining the pain, the grief that they're going through. I'll just read part of that statement to you. They say, "Complete devastation is not enough to describe our pain and loss at the senseless murder of our son, Barnaby Philip John Webber. He was a beautiful, brilliant, bright young man with everything in life to look forward to. A talented and passionate cricketer who was over the moon to have made selection to his university cricket team. At 19, he was just at the start of his journey into adulthood and was developing into a wonderful young man. As parents, we are enormously proud of everything he achieved and all the plans he had made. His brother is bereft beyond belief, and at this time we ask for privacy as a family, to be allowed time to process and to grieve." Absolutely understandable, and no doubt we will hear from the family of that other young student, Grace, who was walking home with Barnaby in the early hours of the morning, having attended the Prism nightclub, celebrating the end of their university year and looking forward to that graduation ball. Of course, it was supposed to take place last night, but was cancelled as a mark of respect, and we're still awaiting details and a name for the man in his 50s, the third person who was stabbed to death in these horrific attacks. A little earlier, I spoke to Ross Murphy, a local man here in Nottingham who'd been just getting off a bus at this very spot in the early hours of yesterday morning, heading to the gym early in the morning, when he actually heard the sound of that van crashing into those pedestrians who were at this spot, and he saw one of the most seriously injured pedestrians. This is what he told me.
I came off the 36 bus about 50 yards that way. As I did, I heard a loud bang. I thought nothing of it really. There's plenty of people about this time in the morning. I walked towards McDonald's for a quick coffee, as I usually do, before I go to the gym. And I saw somebody lying half off the road and pavement opposite McDonald's, and still thought nothing of it, because there's a lot of people like beggars, etc. in this area in the morning. I thought somebody just collapsed. Anyway, I went in McDonald's, and nobody in there thought much about it, and then about 5 minutes later, I think it's Leanne, one of the cleaners, said there's been a hit and run.
And of course, Ross at that point then realised something much more sinister was unfolding. This city clearly in shock at the events that unfolded in the early hours of yesterday. The suspect is still in police custody, being questioned by detectives. He is a 31-year-old. GB News can reveal that he's a West African migrant who'd been living in the UK for more than a decade, and also that he is known to the police. Any more than that, we don't really have details of, but that will obviously form the investigation as they go forward. Counter-terrorism detectives were assisting Nottinghamshire police yesterday, but they have now taken a step back, as there is no evidence at this point, apparently, that points to a terrorist motivation, but quite what the motivation was, we still don't know.
All right, that's Mark White, our Home Security Editor. We'll hear from him later, of course, in the programme. We were talking yesterday, weren't we, Bev, because we knew the attacks that took place in the heart of student land, and we even mentioned that nightclub.
Yeah, we did. We were looking at the location, and we said there'd clearly been a big student night there, and to wake up this morning to see these pictures of these beautiful young people. It's so heartbreaking. Barnaby Webber, who's a cricketer, heading off potentially in a semi-professional career, and lovely Grace Kumar, who is also 19.
Top hockey player.
Hockey player, semi-international hockey player. It's just heartbreaking, exactly the same age as my son. And there, but for the grace of God, go any parents.
Yeah, and we mustn't forget the family of the van driver who was stabbed to death, and we wish good Godspeed recovery to the 3 people who are in hospital, one of whom is critically injured because the suspect drove his van into them.
Awful. Let us know your thoughts this morning, even if you just want to express your condolences, because you were with us for 2.5 hours yesterday morning as we were covering this story. gbviews@gbnews.com is the email address.
Now, the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, is going to appear before the Commons Home Affairs Select Committee any moment now.
The Parliamentary Committee is chaired by Labour's Diana Johnson, and they will quiz the Home Secretary on policing, asylum and immigration. Of course, it's a big day for migration. The illegal migration bill will be back in the Lords also today. Our political reporter, Catherine Forster, joins us now in the studio. Will this be an easy ride for Suella Braverman this morning, Catherine?
I don't imagine it will. I mean, these select committees are cross-party groups. There's 11 in the Home Affairs Select Committee, and their job is to basically hold people in government to account. What are you doing? How are you doing it? What are the successes? And they tend to take no nonsense and take no prisoners. Now, It's chaired by Dame Diana Johnson and people like Labour's Carolyn Harris, also Conservatives such as Marco Longhi, Deputy Chair of Conservatives Lee Anderson. But, I mean, Marco Longhi's been writing today. It's not the case at all that the Conservatives are going to sit quietly and play nicely. So it is starting any minute now, and obviously there'll be questions on events yesterday, and I suspect, too, a big focus on illegal migration.
And we had the flipping Prime Minister telling us last week they were getting to grips with the cross-channel crossings because they were much lower. And then at the weekend, we had a record number. I think yesterday, another 550. They haven't got a grip with it. Of course, Labour are resisting the Stop the Boats policy, but Suella Braverman has staked her entire political authority on getting this problem sorted, and it ain't sorted.
No, certainly a huge amount of work to do. The illegal migration bill's back in the House of Lords today. I think it's on its 5th day. It's at committee stage now. 5th day. But as you say, it's only just over a week ago since Rishi Sunak made a really big deal of saying, look, we're beginning to turn the tide on this.
Because of the weather.
The numbers are down significantly. And then, of course, on Saturday, warm weather, calm seas, we have 616 people cross in 12 small boats. That's a record for this year. But overall, there's now about 8,500. We're 16% down on where we were a year ago. But, you know, as we've said, the weather wasn't great for many months. I mean, we didn't really have much of a spring, did we? So, I mean, sure, they've got the Albanian numbers down, but really, they're going to face a huge battle getting this bill through the Lords and through the courts. At the very beginning of the bill, it does state that, you know, a lawyer view that we're not sure that this is legal, but the government are going to press ahead with it.
Because, of course, it's still going through the courts, of course. The High Court approved it. It's now with the Appeal Court. And if the Appeal Court says it's OK, then it'll probably end up in the Supreme Court.
Well, the Rwanda plan, yes, because, of course, it's a year since people were put on a flight, weren't they? And then they were taken off one by one, one by one. The government are really hoping to win that finally. They're really hoping to get this bill through. They're really hoping that by September, they can put people on planes to Rwanda. Let's see. But certainly, you know, Rishi Sunak has said stop the boat. Suella Braverman has come out with a lot of tough language. They are doing many things. They have got the returns agreement with Albania. They are making some progress, but my goodness, what a mountain they still have to climb.
Yeah, it's like flipping Everest. It infuriates voters. Imagine living in Kent.
Well, it's such a public illustration of us not having control of our borders, which is what Brexit was about. Brexit, control of our money, laws, borders. And, you know, it's so visible, isn't it? We see day after day these people arriving. And meanwhile, you know, legal migration was up at, what, 700, 600,000. Again, another huge record. So the government, it's not that long till a general election. Now, Labour are very good at criticising. They may not have any more answers.
We've got, just to interrupt you, Catherine, we've got Suella Braverman who started to speak. Let's have a listen to what she's going to say.
Which allows single individuals to pay to advertise multiple women for prostitution are operating freely and openly. And I just wondered why it is that we haven't outlawed these types of pimping websites.
Thank you, Dame Diana. Before I answer, may I just take a moment to reiterate the sympathies that you've expressed for those who were directly affected and more broadly affected by the Grenfell Tower tragedy. And I also want to echo the comments that I made yesterday about the tragic incident in Nottingham. It wouldn't be appropriate for me to go into operational details here. I made a statement yesterday, but it's obviously deeply shocking for the community in Nottingham and the surrounding area, and my thoughts are with the family and friends of those affected. I have to say that is the first time I have personally heard of Viva Street, and you're saying it's a website advertising prostitution services. Well, I mean, what I would say is that we obviously have a very... I'll turn to Rachel and see if there's anything from officials, but we have a very This is a heinous practice. We need to ensure that the vulnerability of those involved is put first and foremost at the forefront of people on the front line. Prostitution is very closely related to human trafficking, modern slavery, people smuggling, and we obviously passed the landmark Modern Slavery Act in 2015, and that puts into place a broad framework which is designed specifically to protect vulnerable people to which you refer.
I hear what you say. I'm just aware that Viva Street have met with your officials in the Home Office 15 times in the last 5 years. So clearly your officials know about Viva Street. And I'd also just point out that there are many countries in the world, including France, Israel and the US, that have actually outlawed these websites. So I just wondered, hearing that, is your view that actually we're quite soft on allowing these websites to continue compared to other countries in the world?
Well, I mean, I think that when it comes to adult services websites, law enforcement agencies do recognise that these websites are an enabler of sexual exploitation. As I said, they're linked to trafficking, and we are working closely with the online companies to ensure that awareness is raised so that that criminal activity it does not occur. To be honest, this is the first time I'm coming across this particular subject. Unless officials can add anything, I'd rather reserve my position and write to you in more detail about this specific issue.
Yes, that would be helpful. I just wanted to tell you about this, actually. I had a look on the website for Hampshire, which I believe is the county that your constituency is based in. Now, there were 297 prostitution adverts live on Viva Street yesterday. I had to look at about 150 of those, and at least half of them had adverts of different...
Well, that was Dame Diana Johnson, the chairman of the Home Affairs Select Committee, classically completely missing the point. You've got the Home Secretary there. I know prostitution is an important issue, Richard, and adult services is an important issue, but we want to hear from the Home Secretary about Nottingham, but we also want to hear about what's happening across the Channel, the failure to sort out migration.
Well, I mean, the truth is that the government is making no progress whatsoever. Well over 8,000 this year, well over 1,100 in just the last 3 days and rising. That's filled the 2 barges that Sunak trumpeted that he had acquired just last week. I mean, it's essentially at the moment, it's a barge a day. That is the reality. They're making no progress whatsoever. You've got a House of Lords that wants to stop it. You've got a Labour Party that won't do anything. This will only stop when you actually do what Australia did. Adopt and adapt their tactics. You have to safely pick up and take back to France. At the moment, we've got exactly the opposite, where the French Navy take the dinghies to the midline and hand them over to UK Border Force.
And we then escort them here.
With our consent. So we've got the exact opposite of what needs to be done. And the British people are fuming mad. The bills are going up. The antisocial behaviour is going up. The drug dealing is going up. Towns and cities up and down the country where decent, ordinary people, you've got no-go streets, you've got intimidation, you've got harassment. This is getting worse. It's getting really serious. The people are fuming.
One of the biggest hotels in my hometown of Swindon, Richard, is filled with migrants. Filled with migrants. And that's denying Swindon. Tourists can't come in and spend money because the hotels are full
impact
all
is
over the country.
Absolutely vast, because, of course, all the staff in these hotels get made redundant.
Yeah, they do.
But we still learn that, actually, all of a sudden, they still get cleaning, they get accommodation, they complain about whether or not the Wi-Fi is good enough. I mean, this is just wholly unacceptable. The thing is, the government could stop it if they had some courage, if they had some leadership.
But if they can't persuade France to take them back...
They don't need to persuade France. It's under existing international law. The 1974 Safety of Life at Sea Act, the 1982 UN Convention of Law at Sea. There are provisions within that legally mean they could be picked up and safely returned to France. They won't do it. They haven't got the leadership, they haven't got the courage, and they haven't got the lawyers that believe in the cause.
It would be a game changer, wouldn't it, if they did it?
Game over within literally a fortnight.
But why then? Why won't they do it?
because they haven't got the lawyers within the Home Office who believe in the cause. They've actually got exact opposite. They've got people in the Home Office trying to sue the government, using taxpayers' cash, being paid salaries by the taxpayer to contradict the policy of the elected representatives from the will of the people, which in the 2019 manifesto was to reduce immigration numbers. Instead, the truth is, last year, 1.2 million additional people came into this country lawfully.
The civil service blob are running the country.
They are. And that's because you've got a weak government that is utterly failing. They continue to say, well, we've got the best civil service in the world. Nonsense. We've got a civil service that is running riot under weak ministers, lily-livered ministers, who are terrified because if they actually demand some action, they'll get accused of bullying, like poor Dominic Raab.
We've got to ask you, though, Richard Tice, as Reform UK, your colleague, Nigel Farage, floated a very interesting idea.
Oh, you read my mind.
Yeah, on GB News with Camilla Tominey, our very fine colleague, saying Boris Johnson is out of Parliament. He's fed up to the back teeth with the Tory leadership, because there isn't much. Could they work together? Could you embrace Boris Johnson in your organisation?
As Nigel quite rightly said, in terms of, we all battled for Brexit. We've got the scars on our back. And we want to make sure that Brexit is a massive, massive success. It's still a great opportunity. But let's be clear, there are also areas with Boris where we have very significant differences of policy, for example, over immigration that we've just been talking about, for example, over the madness of net zero, which is sending our jobs and our money overseas and making bills really hard to pay by ordinary folk up and down the country. So there are significant differences, but the unifying factor is that Brexit is a great opportunity, it's being wasted and it needs being sorted.
So if he said he would come and join Reform, you'd take him?
We've got significant policy differences, haven't we?
Well, have you? Because I'm not sure what Boris Johnson as an individual represents. What you've just described is a Conservative Party, and as we know, he's a little bit paltry, isn't he? He'll blow in the wind, depending on where the money and the success lies.
We don't quite know why he became so pro-net zero.
Well, his missus has probably got something to do with it.
He did completely move his position. Maybe if he's able to reinvent himself, then...
so you will take him on the condition that he changes...
I'm saying that we've got significant policy differences that he would have to recognise he's got badly wrong on behalf of this country.
I'd be intrigued too. Who would be the leader? Richard Tice, Nigel Farage or Boris Johnson?
Goodness me, you're getting way ahead of yourself. You're getting way ahead of yourself.
Would you draw straws? Would you flip a coin? Which of you?
Maybe...
That's three bonfire of the vanities right there, Richard, with the three of you. Who's
Maybe
going to win
you'd be
that?
the independent refs of any such... You're getting way ahead of yourselves. We've got significant policy differences.
Don't forget as well, when he was London Mayor, to my utter amazement, he wanted an amnesty for illegal migration in London. I couldn't believe it.
Which reinforces the significant difference that I refer to, because actually Boris Johnson led a government that created a deliberate open border visa programme. It wasn't a skilled workers visa programme. It's just created open borders, and that's why last year 1.2 million people lawfully came into the country. It's the size of Birmingham.
If Boris Johnson does not, therefore, align himself with the Reform Party, what do you want him to do?
Look, Boris is not going to go away quietly and just give a few speeches and make money. He might do that for a bit. But he's a man who likes to be in the limelight. So...
You don't want him setting up another party, though, do you?
He won't do that. That's too much like hard
Boris
work.
Johnson is Boris
That's
Johnson.
hard work.
That requires hard work.
It really does.
As you well know.
As I well know. Having been there, done it, it is not easy, which is why it's so hard under the first past the post system for anybody other than the main two parties. That's why we need proportional representation.
OK, Richard, always nice to see you.
And Catherine Forster, of course.
Thank you, Catherine. Right, this is The Point on GB News, Britain's news channel. Next up, the Schofield scandal has reached Westminster. Stay with us, we're going to hear ITV bosses grilled live.
They won't be grilled. It'll be a light-based...
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to The Point on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce, and Bev Turner.
So we are still reflecting on events of yesterday, of course. The family of Barnaby Webber say that he was beautiful and brilliant and thrilled to have made the university cricket team. They say they are bereft beyond belief after the murder of the 19-year-old.
Too painful for words. Grace Kumar was an England hockey player. The governing body of the sport has paid tribute. We're going to be live in Nottingham for the latest on the investigation. Of course, we still haven't had the identity of the 52-year-old van driver who was also stabbed to death.
And the Schofield saga reaches Westminster. The boss of ITV will be grilled in the Commons over what she knew about the presenter's affair. We're going to bring you that live. Let us know your thoughts this morning. gbviews@gbnews.com is the email address, of course. But first of all, here's your news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Bev, thank you very much and good morning. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. Vigils will be held for the victims of the stabbing and van attacks in Nottingham, which claimed 3 lives and injured 3 others. 19-year-old Barnaby Webber was killed along with Grace Kumar, who's been named locally. His family has said complete devastation isn't enough to describe their pain and loss over his senseless murder. A 31-year-old suspect is still being questioned by police who are trying to establish a motive. A man in his 50s was also killed. The force believes his van was stolen and used to target other people.
It wouldn't be appropriate for me to go into operational details here. I made a statement yesterday, but it's obviously deeply shocking for the community in Nottingham and the surrounding area, and my thoughts are with the family and friends of those affected.
ITV's handling of complaints against Philip Schofield is being questioned by MPs. CEO Carolyn McCall is being asked about the broadcaster's approach to safeguarding employees following the TV presenter's departure from This Morning. He quit after admitting he had an affair with a young male colleague, which he described as unwise but not illegal. Dame Carolyn has already written to the Culture Secretary, confirming ITV has now instructed a barrister to carry out an external review. Stronger trade at bars, pubs and shops has helped the economy return to growth. The latest figures show it expanded by 0.2% in April, recovering from a 0.3% fall the previous month. The Office for National Statistics says the positive impact of improved hospital and retail spending was offset by industrial action hitting other sectors. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has welcomed the data, but he admits more work needs to be done.
Today's figures confirm what the OECD said last week, the IMF said last month. The Bank of England themselves have said that there is underlying resilience in the British economy, and of course that's positive, but we still have a big issue with inflation. That is the #1 challenge we face. We have to do everything we can as a government, as a country, to support the Bank of England in their mission to squeeze inflation out of the system, and that is our primary focus.
Well, we're going to take you live now. We're going to cross to the ITV boss, Carolyn McCall, who's being questioned by MPs.
We had all heard the rumours. Can I just ask you, from your vantage point as the chief executive at ITV, do you class yourself in the category of the vast majority of people who seem to know what was going on, or are you telling us that everyone else knew what was going on, but somehow you and perhaps Holly Willoughby were the only ones who did not know?
Yes, Chair, if you don't mind, I'd just like to say thank you very much for inviting me in here and my colleagues. We've taken these issues extremely seriously, as I hope you know. We're particularly glad that we're talking about duty of care in some detail. We look forward to that, and our culture. In every company I've ever worked for, and this is my track record, I've put people at the centre. I've always treated people well. I've always wanted people to come into a place where they feel comfortable, where they can speak up, where they can speak out, where they can be themselves, and where they're happy to come to work. One of the reasons we asked the KC to come in and look at this, the whole thing, is because we will always want to learn, to listen, to act. So whatever emerges from the KC inquiry, we will learn from it, because there will be lessons. No organisation can do anything perfectly, and we certainly are not saying we have. I think the KC coming in kind of demonstrates our commitment to improving and involving everything we do at all times. A good example of that is actually duty of care, where since 2018, since I joined actually, and we reviewed it, we've strengthened it significantly, and we will talk about that in some detail today. Another reason goes to your point about who knew what. Another reason for welcoming this is that there are huge numbers of opinions, there's speculation, there's rumours, there's misinformation out there, and we look forward to making clear the facts that we know. So thank you again. I'm just going to go straight to your question about the common theme. The people that have said they knew would only have heard rumours about it. If any one of the individuals you have named or referenced had come to us and said there is evidence that there is a relationship between Philip Schofield and person X, we would have, with evidence, we would have been able to launch a formal investigation, because the imbalance of power, the imbalance of dynamics in that relationship makes it deeply inappropriate. And we have policies that say that very clearly. And so one of the things you, I hope, will see as we go through this is that we worked very, very hard for many, many months, in fact, until recently, to ask people, not just Philip Schofield and Person X, but people in production, if they knew something was going on. And it was repeatedly denied by both individuals, but also no one in the team ever said there was anything that they could say. In fact, most of them said, we don't know what's going on.
When did you personally first become aware of these rumours?
I really became aware of those rumours when Philip came out in February 2020. That is the first time things got really febrile. Social media was awash with, some extremely nasty comments about Philip, as you'd expect, but also just a whole swathe of things about him as a person and his there was a lot of speculation and rumour out there. So in February 2020 is when Kevin and I spoke about it, and we actually started looking at it in December 2019, but it ramped up considerably. The kind of noise out there ramped up in 2020.
What you're basically saying is, like the vast majority of people within ITV, you were aware of the rumours about this relationship, but following investigation that you were carried out and the denials that you received from all parties, you were satisfied that the rumours were entirely false. Is that correct?
What I'm saying is that I don't know if it's the vast majority of ITV. You've named three people, I think, high-profile individuals who say they knew. If they knew, why didn't they say something to Kevin? Kevin has conversations with all of those people as talent all the time. So, number one, I don't know if it's the vast majority of ITV people. I don't accept that. It certainly doesn't feel like that to me, right? The second thing is, in February 2020, it was hard to miss the amount of coverage about Philip when he came out. And therefore, I obviously knew in social media in particular that there was a huge amount of comment about him being gay, how long had he been gay, how long has he lived a lie, there were all sorts of aspersions that crossed over to his brother. There was a lot of very, very horrible stuff out there, and I think we said we need to just establish whether this is rumour and speculation and malicious, or whether there is something we need to worry about here. And
you were given reassurances by both parties that there was nothing to be concerned about?
If it's all right with you, Chair, I'd like Kyla. Now, Kyla is not just company secretary, she also is director. She runs compliance and also whistleblowing in ITV. She's responsible for those policies. I'd like to just go through the sequence so you can see what we did to try and establish whether anything was going on. Kyla.
Certainly. So we first really became aware that of speculation and social media speculation, which was triggered by a newspaper article on the 6th of December 2019. And in that article, there was a reference. It was an article with many allegations and a lot of commentary about This Morning and about the relationship between Phil and Holly, and other presenters on that. But also, there was a reference to a Philip's PA and personal runner moving to a different programme despite a previous close friendship with him. Those were the words. And there was a huge amount of media speculation. Our head of daytime and our head of production on that day spoke to Person X because he was being inundated by press, by journalists contacting him, was aware of social media, and they asked the question at that stage, is there any truth in this? Is there anything that we need to know about a relationship with Philip Schofield? And the answer was a categorical no. He was traumatised by the intrusion in his personal life, and our focus at that point then moved swiftly to duty of care for him and trying to make sure that we could support him in whatever ways were appropriate to handle the social media intrusion on his life. Conversations with him continued in January. Again, the focus on duty of care, but also asking the question each time. So we had HR involvement by this stage, the head of production who has continued having dialogue with Person X over the last 3 years at intervals. Person X and our head of HR for daytime spoke to him on many occasions, focusing on his welfare, but also using the opportunity to ask the questions. I think he was asked the question 12 times, and we have logs of the conversations that were had with him. At each stage, he categorically denied it. When Philip came out on the 7th of February, I believe it was, in 2020, again, a spike in social media commentary, and again, there were meetings with Person X and questions with him. In parallel at that stage, serious conversations with Philip Schofield and his agent, very direct conversations with his agent, and that was Kevin, who can talk to those, also our head of daytime and our editor in daytime. So at each stage we had various levels of management asking questions of both individuals, also of Philip's agent, and in addition, as Carolyn has mentioned, there were various conversations with people on the production floor. Our head of production asked people working on both This Morning and Loose Woman, who might have been closer to Person X, to try and establish were there any facts, were they aware of any truth in this matter, and the answer at each stage was no. So we conducted all of those conversations at that time. No one came forward with any evidence. Straightforward, categorical denials each time it was asked. And conversations continued also in May this year, right up to the day when Philip finally admitted that he'd been lying to us, and at each stage, denials. So, Kevin, I don't know if you want to touch on.
Yes, when did I first know? I think when Philip decided he wanted to come out, the agents and Philip's contacted the head of daytime and the producer of the programme, and he said, I've been thinking about this for a long time, I want to come out on air. And so that was discussed. And then I think when they'd had that discussion, I was called about it saying, there's going to be a big thing tomorrow, what do you think? I said, well, if that's what he wants to do, okay. Philip presents the programme Monday to Thursdays, he doesn't do it Friday. So this was on the Thursday, and he came out the next day when he didn't have to then sort of present the entire programme. So he just did it on a show that he wasn't presenting that day. So I went down the next morning to the studio to see Philip, to see how he was and everything, and there were various people around, and we discussed, was he sure? He was really agitated and nervous, and I remember saying to him, look, you don't have to do this now if you don't want to. You don't have to do it on TV if you don't want to. He said, no, this is absolutely the way I want to do it. I've been thinking about this. This isn't a sudden decision. I've been talking about this with my family. It's just the moment now I want to do it. So I said, okay. Then there was a moment when we were alone, and I said, look, Philip, don't worry about ITV supporting you through this. It's fine by us if you want to do this. What, though, is there anything that you want to tell me now? Is there anything we should know that has prompted this, or that you want to share with us now? Because it's fine, but we just don't want suddenly tomorrow or the next day to hear something we didn't know about and be blindsided by it. And he absolutely, categorically said, no, there's nothing. This is just a private matter, and I want to get it out there because I've been thinking about it for so long. So that was it, really.
From what you're saying, I mean, it sounds to me like you regard the efforts that you went to chase this up as being adequate. And I mean, I'm not going to put words in your mouth. Do you think that they were adequate? Do you think that they were competent?
What we think about this is that, just remember, there's another very important bit of the timeline, which is on March 2018, all ITV employees were sent home because lockdown started. And so this was very close onto March 2020, did I say 2018? March 2020. So it's just quite important that, because then this all stopped, because no one was at work, and actually Person X was put on furlough for 9 months. So it's just an important thing, and over that time, our head of production had duty of care conversations with him, but nothing else. So it's just important in terms of the process we went through that it stopped in March for reasons of lockdown. What we would say is that we had done, we feel, from a process perspective, but also from a human perspective, we asked multiple times of both individuals, both formally and informally. And so we felt that was proportionate to what we had because we had no evidence. No one brought us anything tangible, either on the production floor or from the outside. There was only hearsay and rumour and speculation. The other thing we would say is that we were very, very concerned about the state of mind of both Philip and Person X. So Philip was not in a good state, as Kevin will tell you, when he came out. Very anxious, very worried, very nervous, very worried about the social media backlash, all of those things. And Person X could not really grasp the media intrusion that was so prevalent in his life now. And so we had to balance how we asked questions, and we did ask them formally. There were meetings, HR was present, so we did a balance of informal kind of, is there anything we need to know? How can we help you? To Person X, how can we help you? What more do we need to know? You can do this confidentially, you can do this anonymously, you can talk to a counsellor. You know, just because we wanted to make it easier for him, because you're not used to being in the press as often or in social media when you're in that position. So we were, you know, very mindful of our kind of duty of care obligations, but just as a human being, not making what was a very difficult situation for Person X and actually also Philip worse.
It sounds to me as if you're saying that the investigation was thorough and the decisions that you made were well-founded.
Chair, can I please just say it was not an investigation? I wouldn't qualify this as an investigation. I think this was a review. It was an ongoing review that every time there were periods of intense speculation, we went in and asked more questions, but it was an ongoing review.
Would the assertion then leading from that be that if you could go back in time and do it all again, you'd do it exactly the same way and you would probably have reached the same conclusion?
I think that if we had our time again, let's see, I'm not hiding behind the KC, but let's see what the KC says, because that's one of the things we want to learn, which is there anything that we could have done or spotted? At the moment, we can't see what that is, because we did interview both individuals, as I've said, but also other people. We have a very, very clear and loud speaking up policy. We really do. I mean, the vast majority of people, when they reply to surveys that we do on this, say that they feel confident that we will act if they speak up. That comes from a tangible, quantitative survey. So we have done, and we can talk about our speak up policy later, our whistleblowing policy. So anybody at any time could have confidentially gone to our helpline, Safe Call. It's completely anonymous. It's run by an external company. They could have at any time said something about this. We had none of that. So therefore, we feel, in the circumstances and with what we had, that we had no legal reasons to go any further with an investigation. If we'd had any evidence, we would have done a formal investigation. We had no evidence. There was absolutely, it's not in our interest in any way not to investigate something that we know has evidence to support it. You know, put it another way, had we gone into, with no legal reason, into a formal investigation, we would have caused a huge amount of damage, I think. The mental health issues around, you know, the strain, instead of mental health issues, let me just say the psychological strain on Person X, etc., would have been quite intense. And so we didn't have any legal grounds to do that.
As far as you're concerned, there's no circumstances under which you could possibly have inadvertently or purposefully turned a blind eye to some serious shortcomings at This Morning because it was an incredibly commercially successful programme.
It's nothing to do with it being commercially successful. It really, really isn't. I mean, all our shows are actually commercially successful. You could say that about every single one of our shows. There's not a show in ITV, because we're a commercial PSB, that is unsuccessful. So you say that about it is nothing to do with commercial success. It is entirely to do with how we were trying to look after people, but we were also trying to ask, and we did ask, questions repeatedly, continuously, and were repeatedly told there was nothing happening. And I also said that as we see it today, our understanding and our information so far is that we could not have done this differently. But if the KC does say and recommend that in future we should do any aspects differently, we will listen, we will learn, and we will act. But today, and there were nobody would be turning a blind eye to something. It's not a blind eye. I mean, nobody here or on the management board would ever turn a blind eye to something as serious as this.
The only thing I would say in response to that is surely you're aware that the same imbalance of power that enabled Mr. Schofield to enter into this, what he called inappropriate relationship, would also be in play if he was seeking to keep that relationship secret. So you need to ensure that you've got in place the systems and processes that are somehow able to find a way around that.
So let us tell you what our systems and processes are to ensure that that doesn't happen. And perhaps you could talk about our speaking up and safeguarding policies.
We'll come to that later on. Actually, we've got a few other questions we want to get to first. But thank you, Clive.
Yeah, just very briefly, I listened to those answers. We as a committee are very concerned about the welfare of the individuals that are involved here, in particular Philip Schofield, but most of all, Person X. So could you tell us what support you're giving to them at this moment in time and whether that will continue into the future?
Yes, we've remained in touch with Philip, as you'd expect, and he is receiving counselling. We're just saying that Philip is just receiving counselling, and which I...
Well, that's Dame Carolyn McCall giving evidence. I have to say, to be fair to Carolyn Noakes, the chairwoman of that committee, she got straight to the point very quickly, unlike the chairwoman of the Home Affairs Committee, who was banging on about a completely odd subject, talking to the Home Secretary. But we're going to talk now to Roger Bolton, who was a very senior executive at the BBC. Roger Bolton, hello to you. Good morning. Carolyn McCall is an assured performer. She's run many companies, The Guardian, EasyJet. She's been at ITV for a very long time. Is she convincing you?
Who was involved in having the initial conversations with them has been...
done what she thought was necessary. I think she's a good chief executive. But what you're talking about here is a total imbalance of power. They should be asking themselves the fundamental question is, since so many people knew, why did none of these young people who are working on these programs have the confidence to complain and to raise the issue? And my view is there are three reasons for that. One is the fantastic power of television personalities now who can make and break shows in a way they couldn't before. The vulnerability of young staff who are on it's a casualized industry. They have very short-term contracts. They work exceptionally long hours. They are terrified of not being able to work. And the third thing is that you have no trade unions effectively of any sort that they can go to. And you have independent companies for whom they work, who are desperate to keep the commissions with ITV. So you've got a situation of the virtually terrified, powerless young people. They're not going to complain because they're too scared to do so. So what people here need to say, not just have you got the processes in place that would detect if people came to you, you've got to ask, why are young people not coming to you? Why do young people working on these shows feel so powerless? And they do.
And Roger, it was common knowledge, it was talked about openly at ITV in the industry that Philip Schofield had been in this inappropriate relationship with a young member of staff. This chief executive is assuring us they asked the right questions and were satisfied with the answers they got.
Yes, I'm sure they did from their perspective, but this is partly box ticking. This is a very rich, well-paid group of people, very good in many ways, at the top of the industry, who either don't know, haven't asked, or have forgotten what it's like to be at the bottom of the industry. If you're 22, 23, actually older than that now, on a short-term contract, sometimes as little as 6 weeks, you're desperate for the next contract. You're working insane hours as well. There's this immensely powerful personality, TV personality, whom the show and the independent company providing the show or ITV depends. And you are going to actually say something? It's hard enough to exist. You're probably, if you're a young person, paid what they are now. If you don't have the good fortune of being middle class and have your parents living in London, you're probably sleeping on a friend's floor anyway. I mean, there's no way they're going to have the feel that they can talk about these issues. And I think for an industry, to ignore the fundamental insecurities and imbalance of power is wrong. I think Dame Caroline is an exceptionally good chief executive, but it won't be enough for them just to say, our policies were in place, nobody complained. They must go to the next point is, why are so many young people scared of complaining? And what can the industry do to make this more, to reinforce, if you like, their ability to speak out when these colossal imbalances of power exist?
I guess, Roger, I'm fascinated by what you've just said there, because I think you've hit the nail on the head. The question is, what could possibly fix that imbalance of power? 'Twas ever thus. You have a highly paid public figure, incredibly famous, and as you say, somebody that might be straight out of college, very disempowered in that environment. How do you fix that? It's inevitable, isn't it?
It wasn't ever thus. I mean, people, you know, I don't want to talk about the past. There are lots of things about the past, and we know from, you know, what's been revealed, Me Too, lots of things went on. But fundamentally, if you worked in an organisation where you had a decent long-term contract, you were more likely to be able to speak out. If you were in an industry which had trade unions, they got too powerful at one stage, and trade unions you could talk to, who could represent you properly, you had a little more safeguarding there. And if you had an industry which was more honest now about how independent producers are almost totally dependent producers and vulnerable in that way. Collectively, we've got to be more honest about this as an industry. It's difficult. You can't go back in many ways to what existed, but you could look at minimal contract lengths. You could look at safeguarding at a much lower level. You could empower the trade unions, not in terms of industrial power, but in terms of issues like this, strengthen their ability. You know, most people won't belong to trade unions. There's nothing constraining the independence. But there just needs to be an honest listening to young people and the reality of their lives and what needs to be done. We are back in a casualized industry, which in some ways is akin to that, you know, that existed in the Victorian period. Now, I was an independent producer, and I know how tough it is to survive. And you can't, you know, you've got to contract, expand, and so on. I mortgaged my house at one occasion. I'm not pretending it's easy in these circumstances. But the starting point is to recognize there's such an imbalance of power that it is unreasonable to expect young people in these circumstances to say anything. So you've got to police the presenters much more closely, but you've got to find ways of enhancing the ability of young people to speak out.
And Roger, the culture you describe, the executives who run ITV know it, they live it, they see it, and they must have surely suspected that there was a wall of silence because so many people feared for their jobs. And I note that Dame Caroline McCall now says it wasn't an investigation, it was an ongoing review.
Well, I think that large parts of the industry are in denial. I mean, when we went back to a situation where independents were introduced as a result, essentially, of Channel 4, you know, it was mainly because there were loads of people who wanted to work in different ways, lots of ideas, and also people wanted to break what they saw as a sort of not quite monopoly between ITV and BBC. We needed a range of different voices. That was very good. What transpired very quickly, accidentally, was a number of people, mainly in the entertainment area in independent production, got very rich, and they got rich partly because they cut costs. They didn't have to have permanent staff. They could recruit from a floating group of people. BBC and ITV cut costs because they simply said, we're going to put this programme out. This is the price. If you don't want to make it, somebody else will. They didn't have, in other words, the problems they would have with internal producing within their own organisations, where they had wage agreements, people on longer contracts and so on. It's a way of cutting costs. So you had this immense cutting of costs. You had independent producers either struggling to survive or making lots of money.
Yeah.
And in between, you have these young people not getting a great deal of training, desperate, perhaps starstruck in the industry, receiving little protection. I think the industry as a whole has turned a blind eye to that. It's inconvenient.
Roger.
And I'm sure Dame Caroline thinks she's doing the proper thing and she's a good person. But
Roger, it's Roger Bolton, it's fascinating, former BBC executive, to hear your opinion. Thank you so much for joining us. We want to move back to Parliament now. Caroline McCall, if you're just joining us, Caroline McCall is facing the DCMS Select Committee over the Philip Schofield scandal.
Interest, do you think? As a
rather than just
PS,
being interested
I
in the
feel
public?
that I'm here. I mean, if I was, if we weren't a PSB, I don't think I'd be sitting in front of you. I think if I was, I'm not sure I would be. I don't know. I mean, you can answer that. But I think as a PSB, you will want to hear what we've done and how we've done it.
Yes,
and
we
I understand that.
thank you for coming.
And as I said, I welcomed that because I wanted very much to put some facts clearly down. And I also wanted you to understand how seriously we take things, but also how much we care about the people that work at ITV. This is a vibrant, creative, proud organisation, and what has been said, from the outside often, or from people who are no longer at ITV, people feel very deeply about that at ITV. No one feels at ITV. The vast majority of people at ITV feel that they are, they're looked after. That we have many different ways that they can tell us their feedback and their input. It doesn't always have to be a complaint. It can just be about, I'm not getting flexibility at work and I need some help. It could be a whole range of different things. But we do listen, and we have so many different ways of listening. So I can't really answer why you've got me here. I can say why I am here.
And I accept that's not your role because we invited you after all. But what were the policies and procedures in place at ITV for incidents of this type at the time of the initial investigations into these rumours surrounding Phillips?
That's where I was getting to. So thank you. Kyla, would you just go through our, what we do?
So our policies and procedures, although obviously they're updated regularly, whether it's to take account of new regulation, Ofcom guidance, but also best practice. So clearly our policies and practices as they stand today will be slightly different to those that were in place in 2019.
So how have they changed?
But not a lot. For example, there was a new Ofcom code on protecting participants in shows, which came out post 2019. So we will have incorporated that into our policies and practices. It's that type of thing. I mean, fundamentally, the policies that we had in place in 2019, and it would be helpful for me to give you the shape of those and those that are important here, are very, very similar to what we have in place now. So we have had at ITV a code of conduct. Our code of ethics and conduct is the policy that underpins everything. Lots of policies flow from that. It's a policy that is incorporated into the contracts of everyone who works for or with ITV, employees, freelancers and others. And it sets out very clearly what our expectations are of conduct at ITV, both the conduct that we expect and the conduct that we do not tolerate. It is a very accessible policy document. It has a message from the CEO at the front, which explains why it's so important and why it's so important also to speak up if you see that there's anything going on.
That all sounds great, and we can take a look at that, I'm sure. But what I'm interested in is that you said there have been some minor changes. Are any of the changes that have happened as a result of this matter?
No.
So if I could just sorry,
go
Karen,
ahead.
if I'm just so no changes as a result of this matter. And the important points in some of the important points in our code of conduct, as well as absolutely setting out very, very clearly what our speaking up policy is, which I'd like to come on to, is that we do not accept any bullying or harassment, and there is zero tolerance for abusive position. So anything and that was in place in 2016, 2019, 2021, 2023.
Okay. And there is a workplace relationship form that you now have to fill in. That started at the start of 2022. It's not a new policy in response to this at all. It was something that we updated, because we update our policies every year, as Kyla said, that we updated that, and we actually said that everybody who works at ITV has to fill in a form where they have to disclose workplace relationships, whether they are romantic or family relationships.
I see.
And we've had that in place since then.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
What do you say in response to the allegation that there was a toxic culture at this morning?
What I would say is that it's not something look, we take that seriously. You know, as you've heard me talk about culture, it's incredibly important to me personally, and so it deeply disappoints me, right? But we do not recognise that in This Morning, and I think the reason for that is that, you know, we have tangible evidence to tell you where the vast majority of people at daytime, at This Morning, are extremely engaged and very motivated. It's not to say that we don't take complaints about it seriously. We've had 2 complaints in 5 years about that issue, right? 2 complaints, both of them taken very seriously, one of them investigated internally, one of them publicly disclosed, so I can name the person, I think, but Ranj Singh complained. I actually asked for an external investigation. That happened and was not able to be upheld. So I do want to give you, if you don't mind, I do want to give you some facts. The participation in our engagement survey, which is done by an external company called Culture Amp, would say nearly 80% of people in ITV participated in that survey. That's high, right? A lot of companies have 60% participation. So that means people want to participate. It tells us how people are actually experiencing working at ITV, and it's totally confidential. They can say whatever they want. They will never be traced or tracked, so you can't do it. So it's done externally completely. In daytime specifically, 89% of people say they are proud to work at ITV. 86% would recommend ITV daytime as a place to work, as a great place to work. 80% of people at daytime are happy with how their manager motivates them. And 75% of them say that colleagues from all backgrounds have equal opportunities to succeed at ITV. So I'm giving you those tangible kind of points. Now, everything was not glowing in an engagement survey, but these are strong scores about how people feel about working there on daytime. So I actually brought the figures in for daytime rather than for the whole of ITV, although of course you can see, if you would like to, the ITV-wide stats, which are very similar to the daytime stats, although the daytime statistics are actually higher than ITV overall. So I think when you use those words about our culture, you know, we don't recognise that culture. Doesn't mean we don't take those allegations seriously. It doesn't mean we don't take complaints seriously. We do. Just to build on what Kyla said, if you don't mind, in terms of policies, because it's all very well having policies, but if people don't read the policy, or they find, you know, that they just ignore them, or they say, oh, that's just, you know, corporate gobbledygook, there are so many other ways that people can make themselves heard. We have an ambassador network at ITV, which is 80 strong. These are people who are elected by people in our offices, of which we have about 24 around the country. They are elected representatives of people. They have regular meetings, not just with members of the management board and listening circles. They actually have a non-exec director who they can go to at any time with any problem or any complaint, and they can do that anonymously with the non-exec director on our PLC board, who is an independent director. We have unbelievably strong networks. We have 5 very strong networks that represent various communities in ITV. There are 3,000 people out of 5,000 belong to those networks in ITV. And there are 4,000 people in the UK that work at ITV, and there are 1,000 freelancers. So 3,000 out of 4,000 people belong to those networks. Those chairs are elected by the people. They are very strong, the chairs, and they are brilliant networks. I personally talk to them. I chair a committee where all of those chairs sit around the table and say the things that they're most worried about, the things that are going really, really well, and we have a discussion, and we do it across all the networks. So those are just examples of how you have a formal complaints procedure, which is all about HR and kind of documenting and having the meetings with HR and your line manager and whatever. But if that is not, you know, if you don't want to do that because you think that's worrying to you, or you're concerned about that, if you don't get on with your line manager, there are multiple other routes, and I've already mentioned Safe Call, which is a number that we promote for whistleblowing widely. It's in, I'm afraid it is in the toilets, it is on lifts, it is in car park, it's everywhere. It's on my ITV. It's, you know, I talk about it in my vodcast. I do a vodcast every 2 to 3 weeks for the whole of ITV, and I say, don't forget anything you want to say. Just give us either I've got an email box called Ask Carolyn. They can just email that box and they will always get a reply, or they can go to Safe Calls. So what I'm trying to describe is it's all very well having policies, but actually policies are sometimes not read by people, so you can do as much as you can on policy, but actually what we really, really foster is a culture where if anyone has a problem, if anyone is concerned about somebody else, they can tell us in multiple ways.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm finding this all very sad, and like Kevin Brennan, I really don't understand why there's such a media frenzy when we have war in Ukraine, starvation in Africa, and Indian rail accidents, etc. Having said that, I do understand the power of personality. But one question, you've very forcefully put your case for the way you manage things formally, how there are ways of people being able to talk to the management of ITV. But we all know, or many of us know, that once you have a long-running program, or a theatrical production, or any program, that they tend to develop their own culture within another culture. You've got ITV, then you've got Celebrity doing this over here, then you've got This Morning doing that over there. And gradually, these cultures can become toxic, can become poisonous, because they are close and febrile by their very nature. Now, there is another aspect to this. When, for instance, and I use the example of the BBC here, when they started dismantling the BBC Club system that they used to have, which was a very useful cross-fertilization tool where people talk to each other on a social level about issues. Once you take that away and people aren't meeting across the different programs that are being made, have we taken away some form of reference for people to actually air these views totally informally without going through the management system?
I'll start and then I'll hand over to Kevin because of productions, but I think we've done the reverse. I think what we did over lockdown, which many people in the world found very, very difficult, but people who were used to coming in every day and being in a buzzy culture and with lots of teammates, they found it particularly difficult. We actually did a huge number of things virtually when we couldn't do them physically, and we we would do social gatherings. So the networks were brilliant. They did a lot of cross collaboration. So if you were in the Embrace network, which is or people of colour, if you were in the Disability network, if you were in the Women's network, the three of them would get together and do a big event. They'd get someone to come in and talk about mental health, or they'd come in and talk about adapting to different kinds of life, and everyone could ask questions. You could ask anonymous questions, you could follow up after. So we did a whole series of things virtually. So there was something in most days through lockdown, believe it or not, so that people could connect. It was very important for us to make sure that people felt connected to ITV through lockdown, and the feedback on that has been very, very positive. I did a vodcast every single week. People could ask me directly questions every single week, all the way through lockdown. Post-lockdown, I think we've actually done even more face-to-face, because we're all now in one building in White City. So the whole of our London offices are now, for the first time I think ever, in one building in White City. And so we do things on a Friday, we do previews, and the networks do quite serious events. So let's talk about bullying. Let's talk about this. What does bullying look like? What does, if you've got a problem, who would you talk to? How would you talk? We've got a balanced network.
But importantly, it's less formal.
There is very informal ways that the networks in particular organise events with our funding and with our support.
Okay, thank you. Kevin, you again.
Yeah, I think with in production, again, being in one building really helps this, but there is a lot of movement actually between people working on one show and then going on and working on another. Because the periods that you might be engaged on making a show are not unlike This Morning or something, which is all year round. So some programs just come in for a few weeks to make it and then move on. But the people that come in to make those shows have often worked on other shows. So there's, a lot of people know a lot of people at ITV, and I think there is a culture, certainly that I've seen, of friendship across different departments. The entertainment department is obviously a huge group of people, and they all work together and move across from one show to another. So I think there is a lot of cross-fertilisation about things. They'll be talking socially. We're not the management is not necessarily present for these conversations, which is a good thing, because I know exactly what you mean about the BBC Club system. So it's more ad hoc and informal, but I think there is a lot of discussion amongst all members of staff with each other about what's going on and how you're finding it over there and all that.
So you felt informed. You felt like you had your finger on the pulse, not only formally but socially as well.
Yeah.
But did it come as a great surprise to you? Because it came as a huge surprise to me, the vituperative outburst that came as a result of these disclosures. For instance, Eamon Holmes said in a tweet that Schofield has finally been caught out, but he's not the only guilty party. 4 high members of IT management knew the sort of man he was and never once took action to prevent him controlling or taking advantage of young people. That's an extraordinary tweet to come out with, and I would imagine extremely damaging. You must have been surprised to receive that.
We didn't receive it. It was on Twitter.
Well, to see it.
Don't look at Twitter.
To see it.
I think it's actually defamatory. Never mind anything else. But of course, we wouldn't say that because it would just inflame the situation. But Kevin, I mean, perhaps you know Eamon.
Yeah,
I don't know Eamon.
I mean, it's worth an observation here that there's been a very vocal criticism of and the mention of all this toxic culture and everything like this. And it's quite a few people who've got a platform now with a show elsewhere or a newspaper column, whatever it is, or just on Twitter, to have a big go. And it just occurred to me the other day, actually, that a lot of these people, there aren't a lot of them, but the few that there are, they worked as presenters on ITV for a very long time, some of them, it was over 10 years. There was never any complaint from them whilst they were there. If they wanted anything, it was more work, please. We love it here. Can we do more? And then where I have some sympathy for them is when, presenters of programmes often have a slight feeling of divine right to stay there forever. And obviously ITV as a company and producers of programmes maybe have a different agenda and want to change and fresh, want to bring on new people and so forth. And so it's only really, and this is why I do have sympathy for them, when you have to have the difficult conversation of, thank you very much, it's been really good, but actually we'd like you to do less. It's not very nice. And I get that because this is their life, they love it, they've never complained, they thoroughly enjoy it, and their response always is one of disappointment and, oh, can't I stay, can't I do anything? Which is why, honestly, I tend almost never to just cut, but say, look, thank you very much for all the work you've been doing. You're doing a great job, but we want to try other things. But we're not jettisoning you. We'd just like you to do a bit less, or maybe try and find something else for you as well. Because they have been, generally speaking, loyal servants to ITV, and so they deserve to be treated properly like that. So, but it's not surprising, is it, that when they go, they're suddenly like, oh, I hate ITV, oh, it's awful. When for a decade or more they were there, reaping the rewards and enjoying the job, and everybody seemed to get on.
So you're saying that this isn't indicative of a pressure cooker building up. This is more to do with...
No, I don't see that, no.
Okay, thank you. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can we keep the answers as pithy as possible? We've got quite a lot to cover today. Thank you. Jane.
Thank you, Dame Caroline, and good morning, Dame Carolyn. In your letter to the committee, you talk about no evidence of a relationship beyond hearsay and rumour. Where's that line between actual evidence and hearsay and rumour? What would you have accepted as something more?
Well, Eamon Holmes had a starring role in the Select Committee hearing there. We've got Stephen Pound, the former Labour MP, with us, of course, and Emma Webb, Director of Common Sense Society. Can I just say what's infuriating me about this? The smug complacency of Carolyn McCall and Kevin Lygo, who said, we did everything we could, and we were told there was no affair. There was an affair. They were lied to, and they were presumably lied to for months and months and months, and it didn't occur to them that they might be being lied to, these highly paid people. She's on £3.5 million a year.
Well, it's obviously not very good at analysis, but look, I mean, the reality is, I think that the word affairs was used in the plural.
and that really does cast a different light on it. But I think what slightly worries me about this, and worries most of the sane and sensible people watching GB News, is what in the name of all that's holy is the government doing, involving itself in this while the country is falling around about your ears? And I think the reality is MPs see this and think, I can't wait to have a piece of that. And they're making themselves look absolutely stupid. This is not a parliamentary matter, really, is it?
And
but it's good news for GB News, though.
You know what, Stephen Pound, you're so clever, because that is what so many of our viewers are messaging with this morning. And Peter said, I cannot, for the life of me, understand Parliament's role in this issue. Sian is saying, I'm sorry, but listening to Caroline McCall today, I don't believe her. She's covering her tracks. They did turn a blind eye. The board and others probably kept quiet as selective ignorance. Emma Webb, what do you make of it all?
I mean, just listening to them now, these people are absolutely shameless. The equivocation is unbelievable. They're almost filibustering so as to say absolutely nothing at all. And I think Stephen's absolutely right. We have so many things that need our attention right now. They need our time, they need our, mental investment, things that we've discussed in previous weeks, like AI, like immigration, and yet this is the thing that everybody's attention is on. However, I have to say, listening to this, I do think that they appear to be spineless. And for all of the talk that you hear very often about safeguarding, health and safety, that kind of thing, ultimately, these people are responsible for what is essentially a safeguarding failure, it seems.
Yeah.
And they seem to be totally unwilling to accept any responsibility for that. And actually, if anything, and I don't really care about this, as I say, I think we should be talking about other things, but just listening to them speak, you can see the culture of a lack of accountability in action.
Everything is always somebody else's fault.
Yeah.
That's what struck
Pass
me.
the buck.
And I really loved our input from former BBC executive Roger Bolton.
Very good.
Because he talked about the lack of power amongst the younger employees and the lack of ability to speak up. And then we cut back to Caroline McCall, who was talking about the fantastic culture at ITV with wonderful human resources, and an email where youngsters can email direct to her, Stephen, and be listened to.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm Leonard DiCaprio. I mean, this is ridiculous. The idea that she's going to read her own emails is nonsense. But on a part with, these young, innocent people, there's also the very, very powerful individual presenters and producers and people at that level. And there's a real power imbalance there.
Yeah.
I think that is the problem. Similar, I have to say, to what was in Parliament a few years ago. You had that power imbalance and people took advantage of it. But this is embarrassing, though. Talk about cover your backside.
It really is.
You're not convinced by their explanation? Because they said... Because we were told it was an investigation, Steve, and she's now changed tack, Caroline McCall, to say, no, it wasn't an investigation, it was an ongoing review.
An ongoing review, that's absolute rubbish. I mean, basically, she's just simply trying to come up with any form of words to say, not me, gov.
Yeah, because the fact is, this inappropriate relationship, which Schofield admits was inappropriate, went on under the noses of the boss class. They asked them about it. No, it's not true. Oh, that's OK then.
I think if you could slap a fashionable hashtag on this, like hashtag #MeToo, then they would completely change their tune. If this was a young woman, I reckon that the sort of stuff that they would be saying would be entirely different. They would be absolutely flustering themselves to try and make amends for what has happened, rather than trying to cover their tracks.
Do you think? So in that respect, you who was it who was saying this is slightly homophobic? Somebody quite public. Who was it? It was Philip Schofield himself.
It was, yeah. And
you can see I've tried to block all this out of my mind.
Great timing, by the way, there.
No, I know, just like that. He was saying if this was an older man with a younger woman, it wouldn't be given this same attention, he was saying. He said it's only receiving this attention because it was a relationship with a younger man.
Well, can I step in there? I think that is absurd. Philip Schofield was married at the time with children, and his image, his whole strawberries and cream image on TV was a happily married family man. So that's why there's been a great furore about this, because it was a lie.
I think had it been a woman underage, then it certainly would have been a story.
It would have.
Without any question.
But he wasn't underage. We do still have
when he first met him, wasn't he?
He wasn't underage.
He met him when he was 15.
Yes, 15.
But he came to work at ITV at 18.
Right,
and we don't know when it started.
Yeah.
But irrespective, that power dynamic would have been wrapped up in the Me Too narrative if it had been a woman rather than a boy.
Right, we've got to wrap it up for now, guys. I'm sorry about that. But in the next few moments, we're going to return to this extraordinary hearing where ITV bosses are being grilled at Westminster. More to come on that and a lot more. We're GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then. but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Fridays from 8, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 11 o'clock on Wednesday, the 14th of June. This is To The Point on GB News with Bev Turner and Andrew Pierce.
Tributes are pouring in still for the victims of the Nottingham attacks. The family of Barnaby Webber, in a very moving statement, he was beautiful and brilliant and thrilled to have made the university cricket team. They say they are bereft beyond belief.
Grace Kumar was an England hockey player. The governing body of the sport has paid tribute. We're going to be live in Nottingham this morning for the latest on the investigation.
And the Schofield saga, it's well and truly at Westminster. The bosses of ITV are being quizzed as we speak by MPs about whether they conducted a proper investigation into Philip Schofield's inappropriate relationship with a much younger employee.
Let us know what you think on all of our stories this morning. gbviews@gbnews.com. You weren't terribly impressed, were
I
you?
wasn't actually, because look, some people watching this are thinking, what's it got to do with MPs? But the fact is, MPs are talking about this. It's Carolyn McCall, the chief executive, says we asked Philip Schofield if the rumours of this relationship were true. He said they weren't. We asked the young man in question, said they weren't. That was it then. Did they ask anybody else? They asked me. I think I could have given them a bit of information.
Right, let us know what you think. But first of all, here is your latest news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Bev, thank you very much and good morning. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. ITV bosses say both Philip Schofield and his younger lover repeatedly denied allegations of a relationship until the former this morning presenter's exit from the broadcaster. CEO Carolyn McCall is being questioned about ITV's approach to safeguarding employees following the scandal. Schofield quit after admitting he had an affair with a young male colleague, which he described as unwise but not illegal. ITV bosses also say they do not recognise claims of toxic culture at This Morning. Dame Carolyn says she's still in touch with Schofield and he's receiving counselling.
With evidence, we would have been able to launch a formal investigation because the imbalance of power, the imbalance of dynamics in that relationship makes it deeply inappropriate. We worked very, very hard for many, many months, in fact, until recently, to ask people, not just Philip Schofield and Person X, but people in production, if they knew something was going on. And it was repeatedly denied by both individuals.
The family of one of the teenagers stabbed to death in Nottingham say complete devastation isn't enough to describe their pain. 19-year-old Barnaby Webber was killed along with Grace Coomer, who's been named locally. Both were said to be popular and talented sportspeople. A man in his 50s was also killed. The force believes his van was stolen and used to target other people. A 31-year-old man is still being questioned by police who are trying to establish a motive. Stronger trade at bars, pubs and shops has helped the economy return to growth. The latest figures show it expanded by 0.2% in April, recovering from a 0.3% fall the previous month. The Office for National Statistics says the positive impact of improved hospital and retail spending was offset by industrial action hitting other sectors. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has welcomed the data but admits more work needs to be done.
Today's figures confirm what the OECD said last week, the IMF said last month, the Bank of England themselves have said that there is underlying resilience in the British economy, and of course that's positive, but we still have a big issue with inflation. That is the #1 challenge we face. We have to do everything we can as a government, as a country, to support the Bank of England in their mission to squeeze inflation out of the system, and that is our primary focus.
Thousands of NHS appointments and operations are being affected by a junior doctors' strike in England. Union members have walked off the job for 72 hours over an ongoing pay dispute. The British Medical Association is asking for a full restoration of pay, which it says has seen a 26% cut. They've so far rejected a 5% offer. BMA Chair Philip Banfield says they deserve more.
The value of their pay has gone down. We've got junior doctors now qualifying and being paid just £14 an hour, and yet they have up to £100,000 worth of debt. And we're asking the government to recognise that drop in value and therefore to restore the value of their pay. And it doesn't seem unreasonable at all to ask for £19 an hour instead of £14 an hour for the expertise that they bring.
Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting says Labour would be willing to negotiate if it were in power.
I've said to the junior doctors quite honestly, look, you know, if I said I was going to deliver 35% overnight, you shouldn't believe me. Look at the state of the public finances. And I'm not going to be one of those politicians who says one thing before an election and then lets people down afterwards. We'd be willing to negotiate, and people can judge us on our record. When we were last in government, we got the economy growing, which meant we could invest in our public services and pay without hiking up people's taxes.
This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Andrew and Bev.
Thank you for joining us this morning. Now, if you were with us yesterday, you will have been on the edge of your seat. It was awful yesterday as we saw news unravelling from Nottingham about the murder of two young people, 19-year-old students we now know Grace Kumar and Barnaby Webber. They were named today. They were two of the victims in the attacks in Nottingham in the early hours yesterday morning.
A man in his 50s was also killed, with police believing the suspect stole his van and used it to drive into three members of the public. He has now been named as Ian Coates.
A 31-year-old man is in custody. Police are currently not looking for any further suspects. Let's go to Home Security Editor Mark White now, who is in Nottingham this morning. So we finally have a name to put to this gentleman as well, Mark, who lost his life. What else do we know?
Yes, he's not been formally named by police at this stage, but GB News understands that he is school caretaker Ian Coates, who was stabbed to death on Magdala Road, and his white van stolen at that location was later used to drive down here Milton Street, right in Nottingham city centre, where it knocked down three pedestrians. One of those pedestrians is still in a critical condition in hospital today. We've been getting some reaction through from the families of those individuals who died. We've been hearing from the family of that young man, the aspiring young cricketer Barnaby Webber, who say that he, was just a wonderful young man with his life ahead of him. In a statement, they say complete devastation is not enough to describe our pain and loss at the senseless murder of our son. Barnaby Philip John Webber was a beautiful, brilliant, bright young man with everything to look forward to. A talented and passionate cricketer who was over the moon to have made selection to his university cricket team. At 19, he was just at the start of his journey into adulthood and was developing into a wonderful young man. As parents, we are enormously proud of everything he achieved and all the plans he had made. His brother is bereft beyond belief, and at this time we ask for the privacy for the family to be allowed time to process and to grieve. And we also understand that Grace Kumar, the other student, 19-year-old Grace Kumar, who was walking home with her young student friend at that time when they were attacked and stabbed to death. We understand that her father is a GP in London, that he himself had saved the lives of three teenagers back in 2008 who'd been stabbed near his surgery in Chingford, a doctor who also worked alongside the police at times as an on-call police surgeon who was required to attend a police station on numerous occasions. So someone who's seen up close the devastating effects of knife crime, and of course now coming to terms with the news that his daughter was stabbed to death here in the early hours of yesterday morning. A little earlier, I was also speaking to an eyewitness, Ross Murphy, who was here yesterday morning. He just got off a bus, was heading to the local gym when he heard the sound of that van hitting pedestrians and saw one of those badly injured. This is what he told us.
I came off the 36 bus about 50 yards that way. As I did, I heard a loud bang. I thought nothing of it really. There's plenty of people about this time in the morning. I walked towards McDonald's for a quick coffee, as I usually do, before I go to the gym. And I saw somebody lying half off the road and pavement opposite McDonald's. And still thought nothing of it because there's a lot of people like beggars, etc. in this area in the morning. I thought somebody just collapsed. Anyway, I went in McDonald's and nobody in there thought much about it. And then about 5 minutes later, I think it's Leanne, one of the cleaners, said there's been a hit and run.
Well, we're told that the suspect is still being questioned by police at this hour. We are told that he's a 31-year-old West African migrant who's been living here in the UK for more than a decade now. He is apparently known to police, but we're told that he doesn't have a criminal record, but there are indicators of violence and mental health issues in the past. Of course, questions now will be asked about whether any of the issues surrounding this individual, those points of concern, were flagged up to authorities in advance of the terrible events in the early hours of yesterday morning.
Thank you, Mark. Mark White there in Nottingham. So
that city coming to terms with the terrible, terrible murders. 3 people dead, and there's still somebody critically ill in hospital.
It's just awful.
And a school caretaker.
Awful, awful. I feel really moved by this story. As I've said, I mean, we were on air yesterday, but my son is 19. He'll be the same school year as these two, and it could so easily be any teenagers. And we understand a guy with mental health issues, and we touched upon it yesterday. The mental health services in this country are currently broken. There are so few facilities for people who need help.
We still don't know the motives yet, but of course the police will be questioning for a very long time. Well, also the big story today is ITV. Their chief executive, Dame Carolyn McCall, she's in the hot seat. She's before the Department of Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee. They're asking whether there was a failure of duty of care over the young employee who Philip Schofield had a relationship with, which he, in his own admission when he resigned, admitted was inappropriate. What do you make of it so far?
I think we're going back to here. Carolyn, we're just waiting for that to come up. I think...
and Succession. People kind of joke about, internal investigations. They can be used for many purposes, can't they?
That is TV. I'm afraid that's fiction. But
True,
anyway,
but
we'll get on
like
to the
fiction
facts.
and faction and reality are all merging here.
So we take all complaints very seriously, whether they're raised informally or formally, we've got very clear grievance procedures and how things need to be handled, disciplinary procedures. So if someone raises an issue internally, it will be assessed by HR.
Your own HR department or an independent, like this is a QC?
In the first instance, just to ascertain the facts, if someone raises an issue and it's an HR-related issue, our HR team will assess the facts. They will then work out whether it's something that where we need a formal investigation into it. If we have a formal investigation, depending on the facts, not in every case, but in many cases, what we will do is ensure that the investigating manager, so a senior manager within ITV, is brought in, but from outside outside the relevant department. So, for example, in one of the cases which has been widely covered in the media recently, where the individual was not named, but it's been widely covered that they raised issues about bullying and inappropriate behaviours in the workplace. The HR team called in a senior manager who actually was one of our heads of news from elsewhere in the organisation to come in and be the independent investigating person. And that they conducted with HR support, they conducted a review into that particular case, looked at all of the allegations, looked at the documentation, interviewed a raft of people, and in that case I can say, it hasn't been said publicly, but none of the allegations were upheld in that particular case. So in that case we did it internally, but with an external, outside the relevant department, senior manager as the investigating manager. In the case of Dr. Range, as Carolyn has said, we instructed an external HR company called HR Clarity, who conducted an external investigation. We look at each situation and the facts as they stand and the severity of the allegations that are swirling and decide whether it's more appropriate to do something internally or externally. So it's not one size fits all.
Okay. And you mentioned Dr. Rand raised a complaint. Is it the same as the GMC, the Law Society, that BAME people get complained about more than non-BAME people. I don't know if you've done these
Well,
figures.
people of
Asian
colour
doctors,
complain more, do you mean?
Yeah, about.
We've not
I know you
registered
raised
like
the
that.
complaint. I don't know if you know that.
I don't know those statistics.
I mean, given that, how many complaints have we
So
had?
can I just say that over the last 5 years, we've looked at the statistics. We thought you might be interested in them. There have been 128 complaints.
Actually, I think this is going to be coming to later. I was just interested in the BAME thing, if you want to.
Well, now that I've started, so 128 complaints which have been investigated by our HR team, either formally or informally, across ITV, across the last 5 years. And of those, 5 related to this morning, 5 of those complaints of the 128 across the last 5 years. And as we've said earlier, 2 of those related to bullying or harassment, and both of those have been discussed so far today.
And just last one from me. We know that Philip Schofield's previous co-presenter, Fern Britton, apparently left because she was paid £225,000 less than him. Is there differential pay for the same role in your organisation?
That's sort of 12 or 15 years ago, I think.
Right, so everything's all overhauled.
I think you'll find that everything has changed quite a lot. Yeah.
So Philip and Holly
on equal pay.
Philip and Holly on the same.
Depends on the individual show.
Could you just repeat that? What did you just say?
Yeah, I would say Philip and Holly were on the same wage because they were doing the same job. But probably not, although it was a long time ago, not when they started, because she would have been junior and he was already well established, sort of thing. But we've made it a policy now that when people are clearly doing the same job, like panellists on a show or something, they should be paid equally.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Rupa. Can I just quickly go back to the KC review? If there's anything that Ms Mulcahy finds that's outside of the terms of reference that you've published, what will you do to ensure that these are appropriately treated?
So I'll just start and I'll hand over to Kyla. We've said really clearly, there's a paragraph in the terms of reference that say if anything comes up that is not in scope, she will capture those and she'll bring them to the attention of the board.
And once that review is concluded, depending on the findings clearly, will you be potentially reviewing the position of any ITV staff?
Look, I think we're taking the review, as you can see, extremely seriously. We wouldn't have initiated if it wasn't very serious. I would say that we will listen to everything that's said, but I don't want to get into hypotheticals or preempt the KC review or prejudge it.
How potentially might you hold people to account depending on these findings?
Well, as I said, I think that depending on the findings, we will listen and we will learn and we will act. But I don't know what the findings are going to be, so I'm not going to go into a hypothetical situation that I don't know of yet.
What other parameters are, I mean, worst case scenario?
I don't want to talk about scenarios that we don't know yet, Chair. I'm afraid that we would just be speculating as to what the findings are going to say. And the reason we've got a KC is to take away speculation and to look at the process, to look at the facts, to look at our approach, and then to come out with some findings. She will be able to interview anybody that she wants. She will be able to go anywhere she wants with her terms of reference, and so there will be nothing to hide.
But if it was found that there was basically a cover-up at ITV this morning over this, people could be sacked?
As I said, I don't want to get into hypotheticals because that is hypothetical currently.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. Can I just say what I don't think this is about? I don't think this is about whether Holly now hates Philip and whether Eamon's in the huff with Holly and Kevin. That seems to me to be utterly irrelevant. I think it probably benefits ITV for the tabloids to chase this particular hare or that set of hares. I think what this is about bullying and protection of staff. I think that's what the issue is, and I think that's why we're here, and that's why we want to talk to you about it. In that context, what did you feel, Dame Carolyn, when you, after weeks of bullying headlines, you saw the editor of This Morning, Martin Frizzell, tell a reporter in answer to her question that he didn't like aubergines?
I think you asked this of my colleague Magnus Brook, and I think he said it was ill-advised, and I couldn't agree with him more. I think Martin has made a mistake. I think he knows he made a mistake. I think he didn't intend for it to come. I don't think he intended to say that, but I don't know.
He did, though. He was looking out the window. He saw there was a crew there. By the way, an ITV pool crew. There's been some speculation that he said that because it was a Sky crew, but it was an ITV pool crew that he said that to. He knew they were outside. He came out. He looked as if he thought he was coming out with a clever line. That's how he looked.
Well, look, what I would say is that, Kevin has actually spoken to him. He can talk to that. I don't believe anything Martin said there in the heat of the moment was reflective of our culture. I don't.
I think why it matters. It matters not because it was a ridiculous and absurd and possibly vulgar thing to say. It matters because he's the boss of that programme. It's a programme that is mired now with allegations of bullying. He knew that. And if you're a young staffer, before this whole stooshy began, if you were a young staffer, he was the person that you'd go to if you're worried about bullying. I know you told us that you could respond anonymously, but he was the boss of that programme. That says a lot about the culture at that programme, that he took such a mocking and dismissive attitude towards bullying.
Well, I think you're reading an awful lot into one comment, which was a foolish comment. I absolutely agree, and a very ill-advised comment. I absolutely agree. I think to read into an entire culture of an organisation or a programme from one comment from one person who probably was a bit under pressure, regardless of the crew on his doorstep, he probably was. He is used to handling pressure. He should be able to handle it. He made a mistake.
Right. Well, I'm not.
So he made a mistake.
I'm not. If he had a saintly reputation and there was no questions of bullying from anybody else, then you're right. That was just a single mistake. But like other members of the committee, I've had so many messages from folk at ITV who talk about the bullying culture of ITV. Now, it seems to me this morning, you've talked about loads of investigations and they all seem to end up with ITV coming out smelling of roses. So I want to give a voice to a couple of people who've written to me. I've done my very best to ascertain that these are real people, either current or ex-staffers. I won't identify them in any way. Here's one. I worked for a boss at daytime, somebody senior. My boss was very difficult and would, as a matter of course, often shout and belittle staff. It went on for years with nobody doing anything about it. It was a toxic environment. That's one person. Here's another person. I'm very pleased to see your committee address the culture of bullying and toxicity at ITV. It's a terrible place to work. Daytime in particular is absolutely toxic. Here's how it works. If someone complains about bullying or sexual impropriety, ITV pretends to investigate. They'll do a bit of a cursory glance at the complaint. Then they will answer, and they will decide that there was no bullying. The person who complains is then ultimately forced to leave, often with a non-disclosure agreement, and it's made clear to them that they can't return to the work because they've made false accusations.
So they're very disappointing to hear, deeply distressing, in my view, to hear.
Dozens of them.
Well, could you please hand those to us? I mean, I think that
I'm promised to do that because people are very concerned that the way that they write or little clues within their messages might identify them.
You just said they no longer work there.
I said some did and some did not.
Well, the thing I have to say is that it is not something I recognise that characterises the whole culture at all. We've told you that we have had 5 complaints in 5 years on daytime, and we've taken all of them seriously, and only 2 of them were about bullying and any kind of question around discrimination of role. So what I would say,
people are so unhappy? How come people are so?
Mr. Nicholson?
I'll let you come back in. How come people are so unhappy, and so many people are unhappy, and yet you keep doing investigations which keep ending up showing that there wasn't a problem?
So, Can I just say, if we don't know of these, I've said we've had 2 official complaints. Both of them were investigated, one internally, which Kyla has explained how we did that, and one was not investigated internally, deliberately, so that we could find out what was independently, that the person who did that had absolutely no involvement in ITV. They were an HR specialist, and they were not able to uphold the allegations. So I think what I'm saying to you is it's not loads of investigations. We have investigated whenever we've had a complaint, and we take it very, very seriously. It does not fill me with anything but just sorrow, really, and sadness. I've never, it's not something that we try and instill or foster. It is the antithesis of what we want. So if you are getting many people calling you, I honestly feel there is a confidential way that you can let them speak to us, because that's the way we can actually look at this properly and do something about it. We will do something about it.
All right, I'll ask them.
Yes, please,
Okay,
because I can't do anything if they're telling you about it.
I'll ask
because
them.
I run ITV.
I'll ask them, though I think there's a trust issue.
Well, I I genuinely think that if there is a trust issue within daytime, which you're trying to describe, which because you have knowledge that I don't, because you've been talking to people, then there are other ways that they can talk to us that don't betray any trust issues with daytime.
We'll happily give you the details of Safe Call to pass on to them if you feel comfortable doing that, Mr. Nicholson. So that that's the external, confidential, it can be anonymous helpline. And also, as we look into these, if there's anything that needs to go into the KC review, we will be passing it on.
Right. Now, Dame Caroline, this morning you've talked about the ways in which ITV talked to Mr. X about the situation at ITV. And I've written down, you've called it a review twice, I think, and an investigation once.
I've never called it an investigation. I actually said to the
I heard
chair,
you say that, but then you subsequently used the word investigation.
I might have said investigated, because I think what we do is that we did investigate, but I wouldn't call it an investigation, because that gives it a kind of formality and structure that, because of the rumours and because of the time period, it didn't have.
Okay, I've spoken to someone who's friendly with Mr. X.
So the committee's come to light, in my view there, Bev, because the questioning from that MP, John Nicholson, he's an SNP MP, it's very detailed. He's a former broadcaster. He was a breakfast show presenter on BBC television. He came out, actually, as a gay man when he was on the BBC about 20 years ago, and that's why he's getting a lot of private information from people working in ITV, because they recognise someone who understands the broadcasting industry. And he clearly is describing a culture whereby people are scared to complain, which is what John Bolton from the BBC was telling us very early on, because there's so many casual employees working in television who are very badly paid. They're scared to put their hands up and complain because they think they'll never work again. And that's pretty much what John Nicholson's saying.
Yeah, and John Nicholson understands the culture, doesn't he? That's the thing. He's obviously been sat there like a coiled spring waiting to pounce on this hearing. I mean, a lot of you are still getting in touch at home as well, saying this is not parliamentary business. Why are you involved in this? Why are you all swarming around this story as MPs? Go and fix migration, fix health, fix education, fix crime, as we've been talking about in the last 24
And
hours.
also, this committee, which deals with broadcast media, can we deal with the BBC, please? Because why am I still paying £159 for my licence fee for a bloated bureaucracy, for an organisation that keeps saying it's going to cut the number of channels but never does? Isn't that what they should be dealing with?
It's just, the whole thing is just, for me, it's the year that satire died, isn't it? I mean, this really is, it's important because it is in Parliament, but should it be this important to the British people to be scrutinising a consenting relationship between two men? I understand the power dynamic. I have to sort of stop myself short, but
Schofield has said himself it was inappropriate.
Yeah, absolutely. But was it sufficiently inappropriate that it demands these sorts of people who should be...
And let's be clear, ITV are telling MPs there was no cover-up. Many people who work around the broadcasting area say there was.
Right, still to come this morning. We will bring you any headlines from this DCMS committee at Westminster. But also today, we're going to talk about this story that was in the headlines yesterday about the mother of three who's been jailed for inducing an abortion past the legal limits during lockdowns. A very much divided opinion. We're going to be discussing that after your morning's news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Bev, thank you very much and good morning. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. ITV's boss says both parties involved in the Philip Schofield affair repeatedly denied allegations of a relationship. Chief Executive Dame Carolyn McCall has told MPs action would have been taken had there been any evidence, but there was only hearsay, rumour and speculation. Philip Schofield quit this morning's show after admitting he had an affair with a younger colleague.
With evidence, we would have been able to launch a formal investigation because the imbalance of power, the imbalance of dynamics in that relationship makes it deeply inappropriate. We worked very, very hard for many, many months, in fact, until recently, to ask people, not just Philip Schofield and Person X, but people in production, if they knew something was going on. And it was repeatedly denied by both individuals.
A third person killed in the attacks in Nottingham has been named as school caretaker Ian Coates. His van was stolen and used to run over 3 people who were taken to hospital. 19-year-old Barnaby Webber was also stabbed to death, along with Grace Coomer, who's been named locally. Both were said to be popular and talented sports people. A 31-year-old man is still being questioned by police who are trying to establish a motive. Stronger trade at bars, pubs and shops has helped the economy return to growth. The latest figures show it expanded by 0.2% in April, recovering from a 0.3% fall the previous month. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has welcomed the data but admits more work needs to be done. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2644 and €1.1704. The price of gold is £1,542.80 per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,620 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
Good morning, this is The Point on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think. Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever. And that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Fridays from 8, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 11:38. You're with To The Point on GB News. Now, big story this week. Ministers are facing calls to relax abortion laws after a woman was jailed for carrying out a late-term termination.
The baby was between 32 to 34 weeks, well past Britain's legal limit of 24 weeks. She took pills which to induce the child. She's got sentenced for 28 days. We've got with us Emma Webb, of course, Director of the Common Sense Society, and Stephen Pound. Emma, you've got really strong views on this. Because Rishi Sunak, number 10, has ruled out any change to abortion law. She was sentenced under 1851 law.
I mean, a child that is between 32 and 34 weeks, even if you are, whether you are someone who is pro-life from conception or whether you are somebody who has a moderate view on abortion, so, for example, other countries in Europe, they have a 12-week limit on abortion. Ours is 24 weeks. That's actually at the most liberal end.
Well, you can have an abortion up until term, remember that? In this country, with the right medical, under extremely rare circumstances.
And you also can if the child has something like Down syndrome, which I think is absolutely abhorrent because, I mean, there's a whole other debate to be had there about the fact that Down syndrome children are being discriminated against in the world.
It's outraged people because she's a mother of 3 children, one of whom's got special needs, so they've lost their mother now. We don't know what's happening to those 3 kids. 28 months in prison. Do you think that was too severe?
If anything, I think it's probably on the lenient side, and I know that a lot of people will be very offended by that. And I think that I can totally understand why people would sympathise with her situation during lockdown. She moved back in with her former partner. The baby was somebody else's child. You can sympathise with, who knows what was going on in that domestic situation. It's not to say that you don't recognise that there was probably something terrible going on for her psychologically at that time, but that doesn't mean that you can kill a child. A child that is between 32 and 34 weeks is a viable baby, that is a human life. If the child had been born and there was a horrible situation during lockdown and a mother had murdered her own baby, and that would be infanticide, you wouldn't therefore say, well, the mother was having a hard time. I'm sorry, but you have to have certain protections, whether you're anti-abortion full stop or whether you have a reasonable moderate view on abortion. After 24 weeks, the reason why the line is there in the law is because that is a viable baby, that is a human life, and your reproductive rights as a woman do not extend, and your bodily autonomy, I have to say, does not extend to murdering another life.
I obviously completely disagree because the risk, if there's anything that we learnt during the pandemic, it is the idea that bodily autonomy, what you decide to do with your body as a sentient adult human female, must trump all other laws, governments, regulations, and this story is tragic.
But what about the bodily autonomy of the child? Does the child not have a right to its own bodily autonomy?
But Emma, if you take that to its logical conclusion, and if we are living under a government who decides that if you get pregnant, you as the woman, your rights are irrelevant now. That child's life trumps your human sentient existence. I think that the sentence was way too harsh. I mean, it's over, to care about the unborn child, wonderful. But what about the 3 children who are left at home
it's also
without
their
their mother?
sibling that has
They,
been
at that
murdered
point,
by
are
their
more
mother.
important.
Yep.
But the well-being of those 3 children left at home...
What do you think? This is always difficult.
This is an horrific act.
This is not the Handmaid's Tale here. We're talking about a person making choice. Look, we have in this country, we have a compromise which is very painful for a great many people. There are very, very strong views. You've expressed yours. And I think, Emma, God love you, I think where you actually expressed the sympathy was very, very impressive, because there's no good news in this story.
No.
There's nothing good for any single person involved in it. But look, we have a compromise whereby 24 weeks is the limit. And I think we have to respect that. We have to respect that 24.
Under any circumstance?
No, of course not. If the health of the mother is so dangerous, and you know and I know that there can be a termination up to half an hour beforehand if the mother's going to die.
Yes, that's right.
And which is one of the problems we didn't have in Northern Ireland.
There was no health issue with this mother.
Yeah.
She decided she didn't want it, partly because she hadn't brought herself to tell the partner that it wasn't his child.
Yeah. And the other fact is that the abortifacients that she took were illegally obtained anyway.
So should she have gone to prison?
Yeah. I think she has to, because the law is the law.
But what about those 3 children?
For 28 months?
Yeah.
28 months?
28, well, she'll be out in, what,
14?
No, but what about those 3 children who are at home without their mother?
Yeah, but...
My heart breaks for them.
But you could say that about any single case, any single woman who...
She's no threat to the pub. She's no threat to the public. This woman poses no threats to
What do those children think anyway? Those 3 children who know that their sibling has been killed. I say, what does it impact on
Well, I'd
them?
like to think that they would understand that their mother was under extreme pressure at 44 years old with 3 children, one of them with significant learning needs, in a very complicated, what sounds like a romantic situation, that she'd got herself into a terrible mess where she didn't know who was the father of this child. And I'm sorry, my sympathies extend to the people who are alive. Of course, it is awful that that baby wasn't conceived in different circumstances.
But why should the baby that has been allowed by the mother to get so far along, why should that baby be the collateral damage of what is, admittedly, possibly, we don't know very much about the domestic situation, a tragic situation for those involved, including the children, because, as Stephen said, it's their sibling that has been killed here.
And the sex with the partner was consensual. It's not as if there was a rape involved
And
here, or
the decision...
But you can't that's punishing morality. That's punishing her for her moral choice. And I have a huge issue with that, because none of us are morally
but
white and white.
none of us have the right, in whatever tricky situation, to murder another person. And the argument for bodily autonomy extends to respecting other people's right to live. And that baby, like I said, whether you take a liberal view on abortion or whether you take an absolute pro-life view on abortion, that was a baby. There are many, many people who have been... Of course, there are lots of people who have been responding in offence at this, but there are many, many people who have been saying, I was born earlier than that baby was terminated and I survived and I've lived a good life.
But what you are asking that woman to do is to give birth to a child that is not wanted. And we need to live in a world where as many children as possible...
But why didn't she
We have to live in a world where as many children as possible are born to parents who want them, because children who are not wanted live often, not always, but much less happy lives.
Is there not a point also, if the court didn't take this position, other mothers may take the same decision, that they can end the pregnancy at 35 weeks, 36 weeks, just because they don't want it?
You do not factor that into that situation.
I think your point about the people being wanted, when crime went down in New York in the 1970s and 1980s, everybody thought it was to do with Rudy Giuliani. In fact, to do with Roe v. Wade. It's because a huge number of unwanted children were not being born, and that was, it's actually demonstrable. But I would say that most children in this country are wanted. I mean, there are huge numbers of children awaiting adoption, awaiting hating fostering, we know that. But I know so many people, so many young children who were brought up as by foster parents or adopted, who've had very, very happy.
And there are also many women who are pressured by their partners into having an abortion. Like I said, we don't know the domestic situation with this lady. But if you will say that the logic, that the precedent this sets, has the result of eroding women's rights all the way back to conception, surely you can see that if you were to give this woman a lenient punishment, the logic goes in the opposite direction of not upholding the law, and then lots of babies, viable children, having their lives terminated, and that being something that, you know, someone could be pressured into by their partner.
This is a fascinating discussion, but sadly we've got to bring it to an end because we've run out of time, because we're going back to Westminster because it's Prime Minister's question time today too. Emma Webb, thank you for making your argument very powerfully. Stephen Pound, always makes your argument very powerfully.
Right, GB News Live is next with Stephen Dixon today. This has been To The Point with Andrew and Bev. We're back tomorrow at 9:30.
See you then.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly,